Welcome, everyone, to our fourth session of the delightful and surprising mythology of Judaism. Our session tonight is about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. And as we did it before, I will be going through the slides and doing a bunch of reading. And feel free to put your questions and comments in chat, and I'll keep an eye on them. And if something interesting or compelling comes up, I will interrupt and read. And then if it's something overwhelming, just unmute yourself and chime right in. So generally, I think most of you know this, the copies of the texts and the recordings of these sessions are online. You go to my website, you click on classes, and then right at the top, well, it's actually not at the top yet now because I'm promoting another class. I'll talk about that as we close tonight. But right there is a description of this class, and now there's a whole list of recordings and texts that hopefully you are able to access. So let's return to Eden. Dress. Everybody looks suitably dressed. I don't see any fig leaves. And I won't question all those people who don't have their cameras on. I'll just assume you're all dressed appropriately for the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden, an idyllic place, of course, in general thought. And
blessing.
Oh, thank you, Jerry. Blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you for reminding me. So before we get to the Garden of Eden, I want to talk a little bit or review some of the myths in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, about creation. So this actually describes what happened really even before the creation stories in the Torah. It's a very well-known story from the standpoint of Kabbalah, and it's often this idea of the shattering of the vessels and gathering of the sparks is a characteristic of Lurianic Kabbalah. Luria was a mystic that lived in Sfat, I think in the 1400s, maybe 1500s. And so he had a particular take on Lurianic Kabbalah. Just to kind of give you an overview of Lurianic Kabbalah, and you'll see how it's described here. Here's the basic idea. In the beginning, before the beginning, everything was all God and only God. The entire universe was just God. So now God decides to create a physical universe, which is an interesting idea. Why in the world, why in the universe, I suppose I should say, would God want to have a physical universe? There's actually two answers traditionally in Judaism given to that question. One I really like and one I really don't like. The one I don't like is if God is to be praised, then there has to be somebody around to praise God. A little egocentric. That one I don't like. The one I really liked is God decided to create a physical universe because God likes stories. And if God likes stories, there has to be something to tell stories about. And, same idea, God likes relationship. God wants to be in relationship with humanity. I would say a major and very powerful, I believe, idea in Kabbalah is the idea that God wants to be in relationship with humanity. Indeed, God cannot achieve God's goals without the support and assistance of humanity. We'll actually talk a lot more about that next week when we talk about the Messiah. So here's the idea. In the beginning, before the beginning, the universe is all God and only God, nothing else. So God decides to create a physical universe by withdrawing from a certain spot. There's a spot, and that's actually the Jewish mystical teaching. That spot is under the dome of the rock. There's a rock under the dome of the rock. In Jewish mysticism, it's called the Even Hashtiyah, the foundation stone. And it's on that stone that God decided to create the universe. And God creates the universe by withdrawing. The word is tzimtzum in Kabbalah. God withdraws from a spot But now God wants to create a universe here. So God starts pouring divine light. You'll see this in the description, into this spot, and creates vessels to hold the divine light. The vessels are like mini sets of sphirot. And you're familiar with this if you studied some Kabbalah, but things get out of hand. God's light and power is so great that it overwhelms the ability of these vessels to hold the divine light, and the vessels shatter and break. And the sparks of divine light are captured in husks. They're called klipot, and they're trapped away. And the Jewish mystical teaching is every time we do a mitzvah, a little bit of the universe is healed, the vessels are repaired, and a little bit of the divine light is released into the universe. So in this concept, the word tikkun olam, which many of you have heard of as repair of the universe, really is taken literally. It's tikkun olam, with divine superglue. God is actually repairing the vessels. So let's read how this description, I would say, looks like is from a lot of different sources, but certainly Zohar. At the beginning of time, God's presence filled the universe. Then God decided to bring this world into being. To make room for creation, God first drew in his breath, contracting himself. From that contraction, a dark mass was produced. And when God said, "Let there be light," the light that came into being entered the dark mass, and 10 vessels came forth, each filled with primordial light. The 10 vessels are the Sephirot of Kabbalah. In this way, God sent forth those 10 vessels like a fleet of ships, each carrying its cargo of light. Had they arrived intact, the world would have been perfect. But somehow the frail vessels broke open, split asunder, and all the holy sparks were scattered like sand, like seeds, like stars. Those sparks fell everywhere, but more fell on the Holy Land than anywhere else. That is why we were created to gather the sparks, no matter where they are hidden. Some even say that God created the world so that Israel could raise up the holy sparks. And that is why there have been so many exiles to release the holy sparks from the servitude of captivity. For in this way, the people of Israel will sift all the holy sparks from the four corners of the earth. And when enough holy sparks have been gathered, the vessels will be restored, and the repair of the world awaited so long will finally take place. Therefore, it should be the aim of everyone to raise these sparks from wherever they are imprisoned and to elevate them to holiness by the power of their soul. And when the task of gathering the sparks nears completion, God will hasten the arrival of the final redemption by himself collecting what remains of the holy sparks that went astray. There's a couple of interesting ideas inherent in this story. And one is, it's not explicit here, but my understanding of this is it's very Jewish-centric, that it's really up to the Jews to release the sparks and to repair the world by performing mitzvot. Which, if you think about it, is really pretty, it's kind of chutzpahdik. The entire fate of the world depends upon whether we do our job releasing the sparks. So someone asks, Cheryl asks, how do we find the holy sparks? In Jewish tradition, you release the sparks by doing mitzvot. And so, and of course, in Jewish tradition, in Orthodoxy, and Kabbalah is a subset of Orthodoxy, all the mitzvot count. So, we certainly would include things like feeding the hungry and helping people get food and clothing and so on and so on. But they would also say lighting Shabbat candles and putting on tefillin and praying 3 times a day and having a kosher mezuzah. That is the reason why, if you run into the ultra-Orthodox, whether they're knocking on your door or you meet them, in the streets of Jerusalem, they are super focused on getting you to do a mitzvah. They will be handing out Shabbat candles for women to light. They will try and get men to put on tefillin, even though it's very unlikely that that guy that they stop in the street in Jerusalem, that they get to put on tefillin once, is going to now adopt this as a daily habit. The idea is by them getting him to do it once, we have healed a little bit of the universe and released the divine spark. By reminding me to say the blessing before studying the text, that was a major mitzvah, because instead of just studying, we now are studying with a holy purpose, and we are fulfilling the mitzvah of la'asok b'divrei Torah, of occupying ourselves with words of Torah. And the idea here, and I think this is for me, it's a poetic idea, but I think it's a beautiful idea, that doing mitzvot has cosmic significance. The universe literally is waiting for you to do mitzvot. And the universe, and God can't do it alone. This again is this, I think, an incredibly profound idea in Kabbalah, is that God is incapable of repairing the world by God's self. God needs human partners. I think it's an incredible idea, a powerful idea. Okay, so before we jump into the Garden of Eden, I just want to highlight the Garden of Eden story. And I know most of you are generally familiar with it, but before we start talking about the myths associated with the Garden of Eden, it's worthwhile reviewing the story. So God finds, in the middle of verse 4 of chapter 2, we find ourselves in the Garden of Eden. In the first chapter of Genesis, we actually have creation, the 6 days of creation. And on the 6th day of creation, God creates humanity. And the text says male and female, he created them. So plain reading of the text says, in chapter 1, toward the end of chapter 1 of Genesis, we have a man, we have a woman, and we're fine. And then we have Shabbat. In chapter 2 of Genesis, all of a sudden we're in the Garden of Eden, and God is fashioning the man, the Adam, out of the Adamah. There's a pun in Hebrew. It's kind of like saying God's making the earthling out of the earth, and he becomes insulated with a S-O-U-L. His soul enters him, the breath of life enters him by God blowing the breath of life into the man. And that's one of the reasons why it's on Jewish understanding, one becomes a fully independent one becomes an independent human life at the moment of the first breath. The fetus is considered living, but it's not considered to be a separate soul. Stephen says, doesn't say God can't, is incapable of contradicting the idea that he's infinite, unlimited, and I can't really understand this. I heard this week, go use black bread. I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh yeah, God used different color bread, different color earth.
What I was trying to ask is,
yes,
the idea, you were saying God can't do it by himself or is incapable or something, and that seems to go against the idea that I've learned elsewhere of God is unlimited, God is infinite, God can do everything or anything, and there are no limitations on what he can do.
Yeah, I think you would be hard-pressed to justify that idea from Jewish sources, that God is completely unlimited and can do anything. So I would say it might well be that one of the ideas that's going on here is that God decides to self-limit. I was actually discussing this earlier today. The fact that God contracts and contains God's self to form the universe is a form of self-limiting. So I do think that's a Kabbalistic idea. So we have the man, and I think we may have discussed this. There are myths and traditions that, how do we explain that in chapter 1 we had a male and female, and in chapter 2 there just seems to be a man? And we'll see this actually in one of the myths. One possibility is that the first woman was Lilith, and she got kicked out of town. We talked a lot about Lilith, I think, in the first class. The other idea is that the first man, Adam Rishon, was both male and female. And we'll see some myths about that. One way of thinking about it is kind of like Siamese twins. And of course, the standard interpretation here is that there is surgery done, and God performs the surgery on Adam's rib, and removes Adam's rib, and out of the rib the woman is made. And they seem to like each other, which is kind of nice. I have so much fun looking for these images. So they seem to like each other, which is a good thing because there's nobody else. But tension comes in because the woman, who's, by the way, the woman's name is not Eve, the woman's name is Chava. And so one fun thing is, how did Chava become Eve? Chava became Eve in the Greek translation because there's no in Greek. So what they did in the Greek translation, is a Jewish translation, when they had Chava, they just took out the and what was left was Eva, which becomes Eve. So she starts talking to a serpent. We're going to read a bunch of stories about her conversation. And they eat the forbidden fruit, and God shows up. And they have some fig leaves, and eventually they'll get better clothing. And then they are driven from the Garden of Eden. And the way back to the Garden of Eden is guarded by by Kruvim, by cherubs, and the cherub holds an ever-turning fiery sword. By the way, it's also important to bear in mind, the reason they are sent out of the Garden of Eden is so that they don't eat from the tree of life. Almost everybody you talk to when you review this story will say they were driven from the Garden of Eden as a punishment. That's not in the text. The text is actually quite clear that they are driven from the Garden of Eden because we ate from the wrong tree. If we would have eaten from the tree of life, we would live forever. But we ate from the tree of knowledge and did not live forever. So let's read some of the myths here about this hermaphrodite, a being with both male and female aspects. Some say that Adam was originally created with two faces, one male and one female, one facing forward and one behind. As it is said, male and female, he created them. Others say that I'll just say Adam and Eve were created as a single being, with Adam in the front and Eve in the back, so that Adam's back was in the shape of Eve. How did this happen? God had originally intended to create two people, but ultimately only one was brought into being. But facing in two directions made walking difficult and conversation awkward. So God changed his mind and split Adam into two, making two backs, one from Adam and one for Eve, and dividing them into two separate beings. Then there are those who say that Adam lost his second face in a different way through his sin, for when Adam sinned, God took away one of his faces. This myth is a very clear parallel to a Greek myth found in pre-Socratic sources, and most famously in Plato's Symposium, that every person seeks to find his or her other half. That myth is intended to explain the nature of eros as a craving for completeness, since each person is only a part of what he or she once was. The meaning really does not carry over in the Jewish version of the myth, except by implication. The closest concept in Judaism is that of beshert, in which every person is said to have a destined one. This grows out of the Talmudic dictum that 40 days before a child is born, a voice goes forth from heaven to declare that this one will marry that one. Let's see. So let me comment on this, and I'll look at the chat. There's a couple of interesting things going on here. One is this idea of eros, and if you read the story, it says therefore, a man leaves his wife and leaves his parents and clings to his wife. So this is kind of an origin story. Why is it that men and women are trying to become one flesh again? Because we originally were one flesh. So that's a story. Most of us have heard the Yiddish term beshert. Most people don't know. Let's see, Beth. I think you're a German speaker. My understanding is the Yiddish word beshert comes from the German and Yiddish word for shears. I don't know if that's a word with which you are familiar.
I don't know. Really know.
Yeah, that literally the one that's cut out for you. And there's a myth that originally, when you're back in the storehouse of souls, your soul is both male and female. And then when your soul is sent into the earth, the souls are split, and then we're searching for literally the one who is cut out for us, our soulmate. Let's see. Wouldn't removing the tree also solve the problem? Yes. Yep. Next time God creates the universe, we'll do that. But well, actually, let me give you a fun take on that. We actually just studied it in last week's Torah portion. We have cherubs guarding the way to the tree of life. That's the story in the Garden of Eden. Anybody know the next time we meet cherubs in Kruvim in the Torah? This is Torah trivia. Anybody know when we see cherubs
When
again?
you build the ark?
Yes. So on top of the ark, we have two cherubs facing each other. So in the ark of the covenant, the two cherubs are facing each other and guarding the Torah, the Ten Commandments, the tablets of the law. And there's a tradition that there was a Torah scroll in the ark. In the Garden of Eden, the two cherubs are guarding the tree of life. Therefore, the Torah is the tree of life. And we sing it at the close of every service. Etz chaim hi lemachazikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life. That's how this arises. Robin.
The cherubim were male and female, one of each.
I think you're right, but I don't remember the text literally. Yeah. And also another fun thing while I'm on fun digressions. How did the cherubs come to look like fat little Valentine's card babies? And that is from an Aramaic pun. The word for child in Aramaic is ruv, and ka means like. So keruv, which is the singular for cherub, means childlike. And at least one scholar I came across suggested that the fact that cherubs we think of as fat little babies are from Aramaic. Erwin. Whoops, I'm not sure if Erwin froze there. I just want to look at, there were actually more than two trees. Two trees are named, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The concept of Adam initially being a hermaphrodite is very similar. Oh, that's interesting. Of Native American traditions of two spirited individuals, those who are male or female. Beth. Yes, Beth is right. It can be fortuitous. And I think the idea is that fate had this cut out for me. And I'm not going to try and read. You posted a very lengthy comment. Not everything in Yiddish is from the German.
What it says is that it could be from German where it means to give, or similar to give, or there's share, which means scissors.
Okay,
so
okay.
It's not known. It could be from either.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this, I know it's small. I really should make these bigger and use 2 pages, but I didn't. I apologize. The myths of Adam, more myths of Adam and Eve. The first wedding. I like this. God had already created the earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars. All the animals were in the Garden of Eden. The time had come for Adam, the first man, to be created. God called upon the angel Gabriel to bring clay from each of the 4 corners of the earth, the north, the south, the east, and the west. By the way, while I'm reading it, one thing I wanted to mention earlier, in the earlier myth, was one of the ideas of why were the Jews dispersed? Why are we in exile, in diaspora? And one possibility, I mean, the rationalists, I think even Maimonides talks about spreading the Torah around the world, and even talks about Islam and Christianity as vehicles for spreading Torah throughout the world. And in the myth we read before, there's sparks all over the world. There are sparks in Ventura County and LA County, which we need to liberate. And if we were all in Israel, we couldn't get to those sparks. So in the wedding, or in the creation of Adam, also earth is brought from all corners of the earth. This the angel did, and God formed a clay man and breathed the breath of life into him, and the man opened his eyes and began to breathe. Adam gave names to all the animals and explored the Garden of Eden. But God saw that Adam was lonely and decided to create a mate for him. By the way, the first thing in the Bible that God says is not good is loneliness. In the opening chapter of Genesis, in various days, certain things are good, a few things are very good, nothing's perfect. The very first thing that is described as not being good is loneliness. So one day, what?
Many of us could have told you that today.
Thank you, Jerry. So one day when Adam was strolling about in the Garden of Eden, God put Adam to sleep. And while he was deeply dreaming, that's interesting, God took out one of his ribs, and with that rib, God created Eve, the first woman. By the way, the word sella, which is the word used in the text, can mean not only rib, but side. And that's one of the reasons why they talk about like Siamese twin surgery. When Adam awoke and saw Eve standing in front of him, their faces illuminating each other, he understood at once that he had found his true mate. God introduced Adam to Eve and explained how she had been created. Then Adam embraced her and kissed her and said, "This one at last is the bone of my bone and the flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for man she was taken." And that's actually a very good translation of the Hebrew. So we have woman taken from man. The Hebrew for woman is isha, taken from ish. So there's definitely a connection both in the English and in the Hebrew. Then God knew that the time has come for the world's first wedding. You didn't think we were going to put this couple together without benefit of marriage, did you? God himself prepared tables of precious pearls and filled them with delicacies. God also created 10 wedding canopies for them, all made of precious gems, pearls, and gold. So too did he attire Eve, the first bride, in a beautiful wedding dress and braid her hair and adorn her with 24 different ornaments. As the ceremony began, the ministering angels walked before Adam, leading him beneath the wedding canopies. Michael and Gabriel were Adam's groomsmen. Then God himself brought the bride to Adam and stood before them like a cantor and took the cup of blessing and blessed them, as it is said in chapter 1 of Genesis, God blessed them. As soon as Adam and Eve were wed, still other angels descended to the Garden of Eden, playing music for the newlyweds, beating tambourines and dancing to pipes. So too did the sun, the moon, and the stars dance for them. And all of creation joined in the celebration of the world's first wedding. Let's see, one of the reading first week said someone told Lilith to return to her husband. So they had to, yeah, you're going to find lots of myths, and they don't all fit together. They're myths written different times, different sources, so they are not all consistent with one another. The origin of fire. For the first week of creation, the sun shone day and night. But when the sun sank at the end of the Sabbath, darkness came closer. Adam grew terrified. He cried out to God that the serpent was coming to harm him. Then God told Adam to take 2 flints and strike them against each other. And when he did, fire came forth, much to Adam's amazement. And he uttered a spontaneous blessing over it. That is why a blessing is recited over a candle at the end of the Sabbath, for fire was then created the first time. Myths of origin are common in all mythic systems, including Judaism. Myths of the creation of the world, of the origin of man, and here of the origin of fire are all found in Jewish sources. Here God tells Adam how to make a fire, rubbing flints together. This first fire is tied to the darkness that descends after the sun sets at the end of the Sabbath. Thus, a series of origins are all linked together: the first Sabbath, the first sunset, the first darkness, the origin of fire, and the origin of the blessing for the first Havdalah service, which takes place at the end of the Sabbath. And there are other myths that go with this. I love this story. I don't know where I heard it, but would put fire as lighting Shabbat candles at the beginning of the Sabbath. And the way some teacher explained it, and it stuck with me, is the man and the woman are created on the 6th day. So there they are on the 6th day, and the sun is setting, and the Sabbath is going to begin. You have a man and a woman, and they've never seen darkness because they were created during the daytime. And the man starts to panic, but Chava knows what to do. She lights Shabbos candles. Murray.
I wanted to ask you, it sounds like God really only intended for there to be Adam and Eve. I mean, you're talking.
I don't know.
First,
I don't know where you're deriving that from.
When you're
we haven't addressed it.
Because had they been good, then they would have existed in the Garden of Eden forever, and they wouldn't have left. What I'm trying to say is, obviously when we talk about trees, we're talking about symbolic trees, not real.
Yeah,
trees.
well, I take this entire story as mythic. I don't believe for a minute that it actually happened.
Well, what I mean is if you want to trace family trees, which is another place where you talk about trees, the Adam and Eve would therefore be at the top. They're the source.
Yeah.
So they themselves become a tree. So
yeah, but again,
it seems that I'm just not getting that.
Let me comment.
God wants more people than them.
Hold on. So let me address it, because I don't want we'll have a discussion toward the end where we only have 49 people now, so we can have a little more discussion. So I don't think the text has addressed the question of whether there would be more people and whether sex and procreation would take place had they not eaten the fruit. These stories are silent on that. So it may well be that there would be lots of people, and if they ate from the tree of life and not from the tree of knowledge, that everyone would live forever, and there would be overcrowding, and that, interesting speculation.
Well, I mean, we know that God continued to create people because Cain was afraid that they were gonna kill him.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. So there's lots of people, and the question is, are all of those descendants of Cain? I would say probably not. Speaking from the point of view of the biblical text, the Bible just is not interested in that question. There's all kinds of biblical inconsistencies. This is one of them. This is only a problem if you take the story literally, which I certainly don't. Let me move on. Okay, so I want to give you a modern take on this question of what was that bone and what was that surgery. Same comment with Stephen Weinstein. You raised the question of DNA of Adam and Eve and so on and so on. Only an issue if you take the story literally. I don't take the story literally. So I don't, we can speculate, but it's a problem that really doesn't bother me. But having said that, I'm going to give you an answer to the question simply because it's such a fun answer, and published by a really major scholar of Judaism, Zioni Zevit. And so he is addressing this question: what was that bone? And he points out a couple of things which would be true of the people writing these stories. So it's interesting. What he is addressing the question is, what would the people reading these stories, the ancient Israelites, understand the bone to be? Okay, everybody with me on this? So he points out that the ancient Israelites knew human skeletal structure and they knew animal skeletal structure. They knew human skeletal structure because folks were buried. And the way folks were buried was typically in a grave, in a cave was very common. And the person would be laid out in the cave, and they would come back like a year later to gather the bones in the back of the cave in something called an ossuary. And in fact, some scholars believe that the phrase "he was gathered to his kin" or "gathered to his father," which is a common phrase of a euphemism for dying in the biblical text, comes out of this literal idea that you indeed were gathered to your forebears, that you would gather to your father, to your kin, because all the bones in the family would be gathered in the back of the cave in an ossuary. So people understood, the Israelites understood human skeletal structure, and they would know that women did not have one more rib than men. I meet people all the time that, based on the Garden of Eden story, assure me that women have one more rib than do men, and that is not true. They would also be familiar with animal skeletal structure because they ate animals, and animals died and decomposed, and they ate them. So, is there a bone? Some of you will know the answer to this question. Is there a bone that most male animals have, that their mates, their female animals, don't have, that a human male animal doesn't have? And somebody put it in there, Jay, put it in there. And the answer is yes. And the answer is, it is the baculum, or the os penis. Most male mammals have a penis bone called the baculum, or an os penis. This bone is absent in humans and a few primates, spider monkeys. And there's a picture of a dog and the dog's penis bone. I'm going to show you my penis bone, okay? So I just want to warn you. This is actually my penis bone, okay? It is, I bought it online. It's not from my penis, but I own it, and therefore technically it is my penis bone. I just want to highlight that for those of you who think I've completely lost my mind. You're only partially right. And in fact, this one comes with a little ring so that it can be worn as jewelry. In fact, it was given to me by someone who heard this lecture and gave me their penis bone, and it was a woman. This idea is actually further confirmed by the phrase that immediately follows the surgery, where it says, he took the tsela out of Adam and closed up the flesh at the spot beneath it. And the Hebrew is v'yasgur basar tachtena. And tachtena means beneath, because tuchas, tachat, means below it. So, and I'm definitely not going to demonstrate this, but on the male scrotum, underneath where you would do the surgery to remove this penis bone, there is a perineal scar. And so that's actually evidence for the surgery with which God performed to get your penis bone. And you too can go online. It is astonishing how inexpensive penis bones are. I have no idea why people want penis bones, but anyway, it is, I think, a fascinating, you could say, modern myth or modern midrash. But this scholar, and by the way, his book is really an excellent one. It's a book-length treatment of the details of the story of the Garden of Eden, and it is really fascinating. Not quite as much fun in every page as this particular page, but interesting stuff. Okay, let's move on to the forbidden fruit. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat, maybe even on the time. So Eve tastes the forbidden fruit. So this text is going to quote from the Bible a fair amount and add some commentary. God told Adam, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. And in fact, the Hebrew is very, very emphatic. It uses a Hebrew grammatical form called the infinitive absolute. It says muttamut. It like repeats the verb. If you would try and translate it literally, God would say, you will surely die, or dying you will die, or you will die, yes, die. It's very emphatic. But Adam told Eve, God has said you should not eat of it or touch it, lest you die. Well, actually, when Eve is talking to the serpent, Eve tells the serpent that we're not even supposed to touch it. So the myth here, the midrash, is suggesting who told her not to touch it? Not a hard problem. The only other person around is Adam. Perhaps God told her that, but certainly not according to this myth or midrash. So at that time, the serpent said to himself, perhaps I cannot convince Adam, who heard the words of God for himself, so I will seek out Eve. So the logic is that the serpent figures Adam heard it directly from God, so he can't convince Adam, but Eve heard it from Adam, so maybe she will be a softer touch. And Steve, you've posted, Stephen Weinstein posted the reason for the seam, and it's absolutely true. But the ancient Israelites wouldn't necessarily have known that. So the serpent found Eve in the garden and said, is it true that God has commanded you not to eat of any fruit in the garden? Eve replied, no, there is only one tree in the midst of the garden forbidden to us. We are not allowed to eat of its fruit or even touch it, for on that day we will die. The serpent laughed when he heard this and said, God has only said this out of jealousy, for he knows that if you eat the fruit of the tree, your eyes will be opened and you will know how to create a world just as he did. Then the serpent went to the tree in the midst of the garden and shook it, and some of the fruit fell to the ground. See, I've touched the tree and I've not died. You too can touch it without dying. When Eve saw the serpent touch the tree and not die, she picked up one of the fruits that had fallen, and seeing that it was beautiful and desirable, she tasted it. But no sooner had she taken a single bite that her teeth were set on edge, and she saw the angel of death standing before her with his sword drawn. Then Eve said to herself, now that I have eaten of the fruit, I will die, and Adam, who has not touched it, will live forever, and God will couple him with another woman. It is better that we die together. Isn't that romantic? It's kind of like Romeo and Juliet. If I'm going to go, buddy, you're going too. And in the story, of course, Eve has this conversation with the serpent, and they at least discuss it. In the Bible, it just simply says, and Eve gave to her husband, and he ate it too. There's one myth which I didn't find in this book, but I've heard in a couple of different places. The question arises: where was Adam during the time when Eve was having the discussion with the serpent? And one response to this is they had just engaged in lovemaking, and he was sleeping while she was talking with the serpent. I kind of like that one. So we're going to go on actually with this particular myth. So when Adam came, she gave him some of the fruit to taste, and as soon as he did, he too saw the angel of death standing before him with sword drawn. Then Adam knew that the fruit she had given him must have been the forbidden fruit, and he was filled with grief. Others say that the serpent did not wait for Eve to touch the tree, but pushed her against it and said, see, you have not died. And just as you didn't die from touching the tree, so you will not die from eating its fruit. So Eve plucked the fruit and held it up and tasted its skin. When nothing happened, she bit into the fruit, and that is when she saw the angel of death. And that's a midrash I've heard more than once. The idea is God tells Adam, don't eat the fruit. Adam tells Eve, don't eat it, don't touch it, don't hang out near it, stay away, don't get into trouble. And so the serpent, knowing this, pushes Eve into the fruit. She touches it. She thinks she should die, but of course she doesn't, because the commandment is not to eat. And therefore she figures, well, if I didn't die, Adam told me if I touched it, I would die, and I haven't died. So therefore, maybe the whole rest of it is fake commandments. I think that's where the phrase was coined. And I can eat it too. And so from this, the rabbis derive the lesson: don't add any more rules or commandments to the ones that God gives us. And those of you who have studied these texts know that the rabbis completely ignore that advice, because they add thousands and thousands of commandments. Okay, so a little more on this myth. In order to convince Eve to taste the forbidden fruit, the serpent said, But God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. Know that God ate of this tree and then created the world. That is why he has commanded you not to eat of it, lest you create other worlds. The truth is that you were brought into being to rule over everything. Make haste and eat before God creates other worlds that will dominate you. And Eve saw how plausible were the words of the serpent, and she tasted the fruit. This midrash adds significantly to the biblical version in having the serpent suggest that to Eve that God himself gained his powers after eating from the tree of knowledge. While the serpent's original comments promised Eve knowledge, they didn't imply that God obtained his knowledge in this way. But the rabbis reading between the lines saw a hint of such meaning in the serpent's comments and made this hint explicit. To do so is to belittle God's unique powers and turns the serpent into a heretic. Thus, this midrash may be viewed as aimed not only at the serpent, but at those with Gnostic views who failed to acknowledge God's unique power as creator of the world. So this is from Genesis Rabbah, from the great midrash. The other thing I want to point out about the story, and this is strictly from the biblical story, is everything. There are only 4 characters in the Garden of Eden story. Maybe I mentioned this last week. I can't remember. There are only 4 characters: God, Adam, Eve, and the serpent. Of those 4 characters, only one tells the truth and only the truth. The others shade meaning, they lie. The only one in the story that tells the truth and only the truth is the serpent. Everything the serpent says turns out to be true. The serpent says you're not going to die, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods. And that's exactly what happens, and that's why they're expelled from the Garden of Eden. God says to them, on the very day, bayom achalcha, on the day you eat of the fruit, you will die. And clearly they don't die on that very day. And then, of course, Adam blames Eve and Eve blames the serpent. So the serpent is the only one who really just tells the truth and the whole truth. And that I'm actually giving this talk to a Catholic group in a few weeks. And I always get some really interesting discussion from Christians on rereading the story. Richard. You're muted. You're muted, Richard. You're still muted. Richard, you're still muted. Richard, you're still muted.
Okay. So
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. So my understanding is that prior to eating the fruit, Adam and Eve did have eternal life. So although they didn't die on the day that they ate from the tree of knowledge, it did make them not invincible, not to live eternally.
Yeah. So where do you get the idea that they had eternal life before they ate the fruit?
I may be mistaken about that. In the Garden of Eden, were they not going to live forever? Were they still?
The text is silent on that. The text does identify the tree of life as something that if they ate of it, they would have eternal life. So presumably without the tree of life, without eating of the tree of life, they would not have eternal life. And the usual response to the point, which is really the one you're raising, is while they didn't die, mortality entered the scene.
And if that is the interpretation, then the serpent really did not tell the truth.
What did the serpent say that
was not true? You would not die.
They didn't die.
Mortality.
No, but God said, bayom achalcha. God said, on the day you eat of it, you will really surely die. And clearly
you will die on that day, or maybe on that day.
That's what God said.
You will be condemned to a limited number of span of time in the garden.
I'm going to ask Larry Levine to instruct the witness to read strictly from the text and not add his own hearsay evidence. The text only says, God says to Adam, bayom achalcha muttamut. On the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. It doesn't say you will become aware of your mortality. It doesn't say death will enter the universe. It says on the day you eat of it, you will surely die. You can interpret that, and I would say many people do, as meaning mortality enters the world. But that's not what the text says.
Thank you.
And oh God, there was something else I wanted to add. I'll think of it. Erwin, did you have something that you wanted to?
Yes, I would like to tell you that God created the serpent also, that he was able, or the serpent was able to talk to Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
And according to the Midrash, God, the serpent is the only one who tells the truth. So why did God punish the serpent?
That's a great question. I do not have a good answer to that, except from the fact that people find serpents creepy, and they are tracing that back to this story. But I absolutely
Well,
agree. I agree, it's a problem.
God also made the serpent. After that, the serpent was only able to crawl on the
Yes.
dirt
Yes,
because of this.
yes. Les, you wanted to add something. You're muted, Les.
Clear. Did Adam and Eve know what dying really was?
That's
If
a
they
whole
said-
other question. Was it
Yeah.
so my take on this story is, and maybe I'll do a session on this, is that it is a myth about becoming adult and becoming human. Do babies know they're going to die? Does your pet,
I don't think so.
does a cat or a dog know it's going to die?
No, not as far as I can.
Right.
know.
So my take on the story, which is not, from this book, is that it is a parable of humanity becoming adult and or distinguished from the animal kingdom.
Well, didn't we have to eat the fruit of knowledge of good and evil? That way we have choices to make. Otherwise, we would have been robots and we couldn't have praised God because all we would know how to do is good.
Or we'd be babies or animals.
Yeah, we'd have no choice, and then
Yes.
we could never,
Yes.
all we could do is good.
I believe it's a parable about free will entering the world. And I believe, I'm getting a little off the subject, but I believe it is a setup. First of all, the tree is in the center of the garden. Second, they tell him not to eat it. And so it would be, the way I love to compare this is, imagine, you have kids and they're, I don't know, 10 and 12, 13, 14, and you've decided you've been paying enough money to babysitters. These are good kids, you trust them, and you tell them, Mom and Dad, we're going out to dinner. We're going to go see, a movie. We'll be gone for a few hours. You've got a pizza. You've got popcorn for the microwave. You've got your DVDs, Frozen 16, and that you really want to see, and enjoy yourselves. And while Mom and Dad are walking out the door, they say to the kids, "Oh, by the way, don't look in Mom's upper left-hand drawer." Okay, everybody with me? So, question number one: how soon after Mom and Dad drive down the driveway and are gone do the kids run upstairs and look in the upper left-hand drawer? Right, like instantly? Slightly deeper question: would you want to have kids that would not look in the upper left-hand drawer? And now clearly, if you had something dangerous there, you wouldn't say that to them. When I think about this particular example, I think of it that there would be a special dessert or maybe the newest DVD or something in that drawer. And you really wanted the kids. There's a setup. I believe absolutely this is a setup. I believe the Garden of Eden went exactly the way God intended. And we gain knowledge of everything. By the way, the da'at tov v'ra, the knowledge of good and evil, is in what is called in English a merism. It's a phrase like soup to nuts. It's used in other places of the Bible, meaning knowledge of everything. Jerry.
Rabbi, when we get through with Jared, could I have a word?
Sure. Jerry? What's it?
Okay, I just lost my train. You were talking about
I was
what?
talking about it, the fact that it was a setup, that God wanted them to. Okay, so I'm going to go on.
They did a study of 5-year-olds, and they were sitting at a table, and a man gives them 5 M&Ms each and tells them not to eat any of them yet. He'll be back. And one kid devours it, one kid just smells it, one just sits there and leaves it. And, they each did it differently. Should we, appreciate one kid over the other? It's personalities.
Yeah, so that's true. I'm not sure what the relationship is with the story. To me, the story is a parable about giving free will. You can't have free will in theory. You can't have free will and say, I have free will, I can obey God, I can disobey God, but you know what? I'm going to do exactly everything that God says for me to do. So I would say to be human is to have free will. To be adult and human is to have free will. And the story is an origin story about how that happened. Ira, I think you had a question.
Thank you. Yeah, it occurred to me that when God says, on that day that you eat from this tree, you will surely die, God was not necessarily talking about the physical body dying. I think God was talking about the soul.
Okay, so you can think that. I think the idea of the soul dying is inconsistent with Judaism, and I think the idea of a soul as being distinct from life is not even a biblical idea. So unless there's a good reason to ignore the simple words of the text, I wouldn't ignore those simple words. I see somebody named Nikki with her hand up.
Yes. Who just said that about the soul dying?
Ira.
So I listened to Rabbi Brisky, and he said something similar, but it wasn't that the soul died, but that when they ate from the apple or whatever, the fruit, that the soul, they knew they could tell good from evil. The soul could separate from, how do I say this? The soul wasn't attached, like it could be drawn into the inclinations of the body to do like overeat or murder or do like things that the body would lead it to do, where before it wouldn't have been subjugated to the physical body that way.
Yeah, so Judaism talks about an inclination to do good and to do evil, and it talks about the soul and the body being separate. But in fact, a very important part of Kabbalah is resurrection, when the soul is brought back together with the body, because both are responsible for the acts, not one or the other. Erwin, I'm going to hold off because I don't want to have a tremendous amount of dialogue until I finish the slides. Okay, some more myths of Adam and Eve. How Cain was conceived. This addresses the question of where did Cain's wife come from? Samael was a great prince in heaven, kind of an angelic creature. After God created the world, Samael took his band of followers and descended and saw the creatures that God had created. Among them, he found none so skilled to do evil as the serpent, as it is said, now the serpent was the shrewdest of all beasts. There's actually another Hebrew pun in there. The word for shrewd is arum, and the word for naked is arumim. So again, if you were reading this in Hebrew, you would see that connection. Its appearance was something like that of a camel. There's something I bet you hadn't heard. And Samael mounted it and rode upon it. Riding on the serpent, the agent Samael came to Eve in the night and seduced her and conceived Cain. Samael is not a positive character, in case you haven't figured this out. Later, while Eve was pregnant by the angel, Adam came to her and she conceived Abel. I know you're going to address the fertility issue, I'm not interested in that question. I understand. Others say that it was the serpent himself that seduced Eve. More importantly, the Midrash is not interested in that question, may not be aware of that issue. Others say that it was the serpent himself that seduced Eve. For after she saw Adam and Eve coupling, the serpent conceived a passion for her. He even imagined killing Adam and marrying Eve. So he came to Eve when she was alone and possessed her and infused her with lust. That is how the serpent fathered Cain, who was later to slay his own brother. And that is how Eve was infected with his impurity. As a result, all of Israel was impure from that time until the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Only then did Israel's impurity cease. When Cain was born, Adam knew at once that it was not of his seed, for he was not after his likeness, nor after his lineage. Instead, Cain's appearance was that of a heavenly being. And when Eve saw that his appearance was not of this world, she said, I have gained a male child with the help of Adonai. And of course, that is a quote from the text. One of the things with Midrash is they're going to take a quote from the text and they're going to weave a story around it, and to address other problems. But the key aspect of Midrash is that they're going to somehow hang Midrash on something in the text. And the thing that's in the text here is Eve's remark when she gets pregnant with Cain. In fact, Cain's name is a pun on this kaniti, I've acquired, or I have gained. So she says, I've gained Cain with the help of God. She fails to give Adam any credit for fathering Cain, at least out loud in the text. It was not until the birth of Seth, these are other children born after Cain and Abel, that Adam had a son who was in his own likeness and image. For Seth arose all of the generations of the righteous, while all the generations that descended from the seed of Cain are wicked until this very day. The Zohar explains that two came upon Eve, the serpent and Adam, and she became pregnant from both of them and bore two sons. The son of the serpent is, of course, Cain, in order to explain why Cain was evil and Abel was good. A later section of Zohar explains that Cain was conceived from the side of unholiness and Abel from the side of holiness. As a result, Abel was in the likeness of God's image, as stated, and God created man in his image. But Cain was of the likeness of neither image. Just what this isn't clear, although one commentary, Ziv HaZohar, identifies that the nether image as that of an ape, because Cain was from the side of the angel of death. Another possible explanation of nether image. He killed his brother. So lots of Midrash going here. I have to tell you, I've never heard any of this Midrash till I came across it in this text. One more along these lines, the wives of Cain and Abel. Where did the wives of Cain and Abel come from? On the day that Adam and Eve were created, on that very day they coupled, and on that very day they produced offspring. It is said that 2 entered the bed and 7 left it. The 2, Adam and Eve, for Cain was born with a twin sister, and Abel was born with 2 sisters. So you got it. We have Adam, Eve, that's 2. Cain and Abel, that's 4. And 3 sisters, that's 7. Cain married Abel's twin, and Abel married Cain's. But they couldn't agree on the fate of Abel's second twin. Indeed, it is said that she was the subject of the dispute between the 2 brothers, out of which Cain slew his brother Abel, and the voices of the blood of the family who were descended to issue forth from Abel cried out before God. So I hope that clears up the problem for all of you. Cheryl is shaking her head. There is one thing which they just allude to, the voices of the blood of the families. Another fascinating thing in the story is, now I'm talking about the biblical account, God very famously asks Cain, after Cain murders Abel, asks Cain, where is your brother? And Cain very famously answers, how do I know? Am I my brother's keeper? And then God says, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the grave. Except in the text, there is an added letter in the word blood. Instead of dam, it's dame. It's bloods, plural. You will never see it translated bloods in the English, but from that extra letter, the Talmud records the insight that when you kill someone, it's as though you destroy an entire world, because why bloods, why blood plural? The interpretation is it was not only Cain that was crying out from the grave, but all of the children, I'm sorry, not only Abel, but all of the children that Abel would never have were crying out from the grave. And the equal insight, or the other side of that insight, is that when you save a life, you save an entire world. And of course, that's the final message in the story of Schindler's List. At that very moving scene at the end of the movie, you have not only the Jews that Schindler saved coming by his grave, but his children and grandchildren, because Schindler, of course, saved more than just the people on his list, but allowed them to have families. So you have that insight. Les, yeah.
Yeah, I had a discussion with Rabbi Greenbaum about this, and what he said, and I'd love your input on this, that the story of Adam and Eve is really the story of the Jewish people, that there were other people there, but this is our story exclusively. So when Cain left, there were other people in the world, but this is our story.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what he means by that, except from the idea that this is the Jewish creation myth.
Right.
Because there's no indication that Adam and Eve were Jewish.
Well, our story, he just said it's our story.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of creation myths, and this is the Hebrew Bible's one. So from that point, I would agree. What my answer to the question, where did Cain's wife come from? And somebody raised the equal question, where did all of these other people that, were going to harass Cain, and God put a mark on Cain to protect him from people? Well, which people? Who else was in the world? Right. The answer is the text just isn't worried about that problem. It's a myth. It's like, what color, I don't know, was Washington's horse? It's a myth. And if you take it too literally, you'll find lots of problems. This is one of them. These myths are actually struggling with that question and coming up with, I think, answers that are even more bizarre than the original story. But let's see. Occam's razor, Murray, would contend that God continued to populate the earth outside Gan Eden. Those are people who Cain feared, but God said to protect Cain, who was a murderer. Yeah, these people came from somewhere. Occam's razor is just a idea that you take the simplest and most straightforward resolution to a problem. I think the simplest and most straightforward resolution is the text just isn't worried about that question. And if it were, we'd have all kinds of problems with the text, which is just one of many, many, many reasons why I don't take the text literally. Okay, so we have completed the discussion of the Garden of Eden. I want to talk a little bit about what's coming next week, which is the last session, and then the following week, which is something new to announce. So next week, we're going to talk about Messiah. Certainly in Jewish tradition, people have pointed out there's a really interesting Netflix series on Messiah, which I really enjoyed, which takes, if you can think about it as a modern myth, it takes the issue of Messiah seriously and addresses the question, or has us think about the question, suppose someone that seems like the Messiah came into the world, how would we react? So it's a fictional exploration of it, and so I enjoy that. The Messiah has inspired some terrific music. And we have this phrase, which you know from David Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayom. David, the king of Israel, lives and endures. And so this is one sort of idea that somehow David's kingship endures. In the biblical text, God promises King David that the throne of Israel will never leave his house. So if you take that promise to David literally, you would say at some point in time we should have another king of Israel, and that king will be anointed. The word Mashiach means anointed. Holy oil would be poured on his head. And so that story gets taken literally, and sometimes really literally. This is the last time I was in Israel. So this was about less than 2 years ago. You still see posters of the late Rebbe of Chabad. And I never see this translated into English, interestingly. This says Melech HaMashiach, King Messiah. And it says, Yechi, may he live, Adonenu, our Lord, Morenu, our teacher, V'Rabbeinu, our rabbi, Melech HaMashiach, King, Messiah, Leolam Va'ed, forever and ever. So there are still clearly aspects of the, I presume this is Chabad, because he's the Chabad Rebbe, not a Rebbe of other Hasidic movements. And there are other kings in Israel. I don't know if you know this. There are actually other kings in Israel. And here is an example. But this doesn't say Burger Melech. If you can read Hebrew, this says, it's English, it's not Hebrew. Burger King, okay? Everybody, you know a little Hebrew, you can read that, Burger King. So that's, if you find a Burger King.
And the customer's king.
That's what it looks like. Okay, so next week, Messiah. Following week, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. I've taught this a couple of times, both in person and online, but since I now have this whole wonderful new group of people whom I've met, I thought I would offer this as 3 sessions, deep Jewish insights from Fiddler on the Roof. Most of it's from the music, but some of it from beyond the music. And so it may not be apparent on the surface, but there's quite a bit of Jewish tradition, insight, and depth in the music and story of Fiddler on the Roof. In this class, we'll enjoy many of the scenes and songs from the movie, discuss such issues as our relationship with God, perspectives on the afterlife, Jewish superstitions, the reason for Jewish intelligence and all those Nobel Prizes, Talmudic logic, the true meaning of Mazal Tov, Jewish understanding of miracles, Jewish marriage customs, and a lot more. And it's even fun to sing along. The class will be Wednesday evenings. I can't do it Tuesday evenings because I actually have commitments for the next 2 weeks on Tuesday evenings. So we'll do it Wednesday evenings on these dates, March 10th, 17th, and 24th. All classes in the same Zoom room. I will send out an email to all of you about this. In terms of registering, the only thing I'll ask is if you just answer my email and say I'm in, that's all you need to do to register. You can also go to my website and register. I just want to have an email list. So in case I have to cancel or adjust, or I want to send out reminders, I will have your names on the email list. And so next week we will start discussing Messiah. And so I'm going to stop the presentation and just Nikki, you have your electronic hand up. So
I have I just wondered next week, will you go into any of the origins of where this idea of Messiah started?
Oh, I absolutely will.
Oh,
so
good.
yeah, I'm going to talk about Messiah and how and what its meaning is in Judaism and how it contrasts dramatically with its meaning in Christianity.
Oh, fantastic.
Before we get into the pretty wild myths about Messiah.
Messiah, they call this.
No, that's Mariah, not Messiah.
Jerry, you're so funny. Alan Sherman, move over. We got Jerry here.
But there's definitely a song in there. Any other thoughts, comments, alternative sermons? Yes, Nikki.
As far as why Jewish intelligence and Jews are being so smart, I met a lady who was teaching in a Jewish school, and she was not Jewish, but she said to me, there are so many holidays, the kids are out more than they're in. That's why they have to be so smart. They have to learn so much in such a few days.
Okay. That's not the answer that I would draw from the show, but I'll give you a hint so you can listen to it and try and figure it out yourself. The hint I'm going to draw is from the song Matchmaker. Ira, I'm going to mute you because there's static coming through. Murray.
You mentioned, I believe, the term Muttamut.
Muttamut, yes.
Mot.
Muttamut. I can't remember the vocalization. Yes, it's Muttamut or Muttamut. I can't remember what the vowels are, but yes, I did mention that.
What was that?
What was what?
Muttamut.
What does it mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so the word met means death. In a verb form, mut means is kind of a it means dying. Tamut means you will die. But it's a verb form that is it's a biblical verb form that you don't see in English, which is called the infinitive absolute. So it's understood to be an emphasis. God doesn't simply say, I'm just trying to find the text. Yeah, it says, God said, but as for the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, by the way, the rabbis say the fruit was not an apple. The fruit was actually, the fruit is not identified in the text. The rabbis guessed that it was a fig. Why would they guess that? Because once they see they're naked, they cover themselves with fig leaves. How did the fruit become an apple, you ask? Anybody ask that? Okay, you ask. The fruit became an apple according to Saint Jerome, who wrote the first translation of the Bible in Latin in the 4th century, and it was a Christian translation. And the word for apple and the word for evil are very similar in Latin. One is malus and one is malum. So Jerome decides it's an apple to emphasize the evil of eating the fruit. The text says, "Lo tochalu," you shall not eat mimeno of it. Velo, oh no, that's the garden. That's the woman talking to the serpent. Yeah. Anyway, it's mutamut. It's the infinitive of emphasis, which we see in other places in the Bible. It says you will. The translation here is you will surely die. Ki b'yom achalcha mimenu, from the day you eat of it, mot tamut. You will surely die. So I am going to call on David. We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, the Fiddler on the Roof series.
Yes.
I have to go in through an Zoom application, not through my website, not through a web browser. Is it the same ID?
Yes, it's the same thing as we're doing tonight. And I can't record this. Actually, I can record it, but I can't put it on YouTube. I tried because of copyright issues. So you'll have to see it live. Robin.
2 things. One is I was given 3 leaves of Eve negligee as a wedding gift. It was a very sheer little number with satin leaves in particular places. And number 2, I taught this lesson about in the garden for Rabbi Greenbaum one Shabbos morning, and I happened to have a fig tree in my yard, so I brought in fig leaves, small, medium, large, and extra large, and suggested the men use double stick tape.
I'm speechless. Richard.
Would you care to
Propriety prevents me from commenting.
Rabbi, could I get a word in, because I gotta go.
Sure.
What I said before about the soul, the death of the soul, how about if instead of soul, how about if we replace that with the word spirit?
Well, you can replace it with all kinds of things. I'm just saying the simple meaning of the text. Whoa, I'm going to mute you. The simple meaning of the text is clear. So if you want to insert other words and thoughts for reasons, you can do that, but you can't get away from the simple meaning of the text, that it doesn't say your soul will die. It doesn't say your spirit will leave you. It doesn't say any of those things. It just says, on the day you eat of it, you will surely die.
I have a
Um,
question.
hold on. Bernice, we haven't heard from you, and then Richard. Sorry.
Right. You kept saying babies and animals don't know about death. And I know that some animals, especially, for example, elephants, mourn their dead.
Yes,
So I don't think you should.
Yes, but I would
That's
say,
my-
I would say my cat doesn't have any sense that there are important feline things she has to do because she knows she won't be around forever. And I know that elephants
Yeah, but-
recognize when their
It-
mates die. So I think they have an awareness of death. I suspect that elephants in the woods, or wherever elephants hang out, don't live with the concept that, you know what, there's a lot of things I really need to do. And I remember them all because, after all, I'm an elephant. And I better do them because I'm getting old and I'm going to die. So in my take on
Yeah,
this,
but
yeah,
well, my take is
go ahead.
different, but I think they do mourn in their own way.
Yeah, I don't dispute that at all. My take on this, and my guess is that the Israelite authors of these texts did not have that sense. My take on this story is that it is a parable about humans becoming different from babies and animals. And so that death, as what I was saying, death didn't enter the world, but we are aware that we're going to die, and that and we're not going to live forever. But you're certainly true. There are animals that make one mate for life, and they have a very clear sense of
I
death.
think animals feel that their mate is dying and that they are
Yes.
losing their mate.
Yes.
So it's different, but
So do you think a 3-year-old dog has a sense that he or she is not going to live forever? Yes.
I'm not talking about a
Yeah.
dog any more than I'm talking
Yeah.
a 3-year-old child.
I absolutely agree with you. Richard.
Yeah, would you care to speculate what effect on this myth would be if intelligent life was discovered in outer space? Is that going to affect these myths, or this particular myth per se?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by affecting the myth. The question that occurs to me is, if at the heart of Judaism is the idea that God created humanity in God's image and created humanity here, if intelligent life or not so intelligent life on other planets was discovered, would that shake people's faith in God as we understand it?
Mm-hmm.
And since I don't take these myths literally, that would not affect me at all. I mean, I think it raises profound questions. If you take the idea of God seriously, then you have to address the issue when the time comes. Did God create life on other planets? How do we understand the role of God and God's relationship with us if there is life on other planets? I think that's going to be an interesting philosophical and religious speculation.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking out, the stream of consciousness here, but maybe the Garden of Eden was, Earth was ripe for the development of humankind. And so maybe that's what made Earth sort of a Garden of Eden. Even if there's other life or intelligent life out there, it's not necessarily going to be the same as it was, here on this Eden-like.
Yeah, it will. I am looking forward to that day,
Yeah.
and hope it
Thank you.
arrives. So Barbara and then Stephen.
Yeah, I have a question based on what you just said, that man was created in God's image. That is what you said.
The text says that, yes.
Okay, so I'm trying to kind of understand, because I'm taking this other class and we're talking about the principles, 13 principles of Maimonides, who says, I believe with complete faith that the creator is incorporeal, that Havaya is free from all anthropomorphic properties, and that Havaya has no likeness at all.
Havaya, you're talking about Yud He Vav He, God's actual name.
Okay, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I would say Adonai or Hashem. Or,
Yes, okay.
yes. So, okay, yeah, you raise a very important question. And that is, the text says, the biblical text treats God as corporeal. It says first that we were created in God's image. The biblical text says God took us out of Egypt with a strong arm. In the text where it says God gets angry, the Hebrew idiom used for God getting angry is God's nose gets red. Okay, so Maimonides was a philosopher, and an Aristotelian, and a rationalist. So he believed very, very strongly that God was spiritual only and not corporeal in any way. So that's one of his articles of faith.
Right.
The mystics go overboard in the other direction. They will talk about God being tenfold. They'll talk about God's crown. They'll talk about God's right arm, God's left arm, God's penis, God's female aspect, God's torso. There's a book called Shiur Koma, which describes, I think I had, I can't remember if I had that myth here. It describes in units of length the size of God's eyeball, the size of the circumference of God's head, the size of God's ankle. So the question is, how do we conceive of God as being astoundingly amazing and God? One extreme is to say God is pure spirit. Another extreme is to say, I'm not sure what God is, but if God has a size, you know, his eyeball goes from one end of the universe to the other. So both of those things are around. One thing which is important about Maimonides' 13 articles of faith is that they're never used as articles of faith. In the Christian world, where you have articles of faith, if you want to join a church or become a member of the clergy or convert, you have to agree with every one of those articles of faith. You know, in the Fourth Presbyterian Church of Camarillo or whatever. In Judaism, those articles of faith are there. Maimonides is respected, but they were never used as things that anybody has to sign on to. So when I became a rabbi, or even a Chabad rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, would never have to say, I believe everything that Maimonides said in the articles of faith. So he's a very important thinker. He comes along during the time of a lot of contact with the Muslim philosophers. The Muslim philosophers were developing a theology of Islam. In Judaism, there was never a theology. In Judaism, you want to believe in an afterlife? Fine. You want to believe in 7 heavens? Terrific. You want to believe in 3 heavens? Wonderful. Whatever you want to believe, it's fine. How you hang a mezuzah, now you have to do it the right way. Is a chicken kosher? Is this chicken kosher? Well, you have to inspect it. You have to slaughter it this way, and so on and so on and so on. Judaism is obsessive about what you do, not what you believe. So if you read Bible and Torah and Talmud, you will not find any organized theology. And certainly in this mythology, if you haven't caught on yet, there is no organized theology in this mythology. This embarrassed Maimonides, in my opinion. Maimonides is living during an age when the Spanish philosophers are developing an organized understanding of Islam. One of the things they develop is Arabic grammar. There was never anybody studying Hebrew grammar. and Hebrew and Arabic are very similar. So you have now scholars, Jewish scholars, typically very much related to the Muslims. The classic commentator on Hebrew grammar of biblical text is named Ibn Ezra. Ibn means son of in Arabic. So he was an Arabic scholar, but he was Jewish. He's a rabbi. So during this period, the golden age of Spain, you have tremendous connection between Jews and Muslims. The Muslims are developing an organized theology of Islam. And I think Maimonides was a little embarrassed that we didn't have one too. So he wrote a book called The Guide to the Perplexed. And The Guide to the Perplexed are for those of us who are perplexed. And if you think you're perplexed now, try reading The Guide to the Perplexed. To develop an organized theology of Judaism. But the practical matter is Judaism doesn't worry so much about theology. Judaism worries about which chicken is kosher. How much should you give to the poor? Where do you hang your mezuzah? What's inside those little mezuzahs? How, do you hang it facing in, facing out, right door, left door? Judaism is going to be obsessive about that stuff, not so much about what you believe.
Huh. Okay.
But Maimonides is the head rationalist in Jewish thought. And he said all the things I quoted you about God having a strong right hand and God's nose getting red. Maimonides' statement on this is the Torah uses the language of people. Therefore, these are all metaphors. Don't take them literally.
Huh.
But it's a very good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Stephen.
Rabbi,
Yes, Miriam.
my turn.
Yes, yeah,
Rabbi
sure.
Mike,
Yeah, you haven't asked anything, so I'll call on you. Yes.
I would, I'm a lover of unusual jewelry, and I would like to order one of those penis bones to hang around my neck so that it would be an interesting conversation starter.
It certainly would. I mean, what a great line. You're
I'm
in a bar,
serious.
you turn to the guy next to you and you tell him, how would you like to see my penis bone? I guess the guy is running.
I couldn't stop laughing when you told that story. I love it.
I'll tell you another story. I did this class in person pre-Zoom days, and I made a big mistake when I taught it. Because I would be in a class, and these were actually Catholic educators, men and women.
Yeah.
And so I told the story just as just as I told the story with this. And I talked about the penis bone. And I went over to a woman and I said, would you like to see my penis bone? And she did not react well. Okay?
It's so crazy.
Teaching this rather dense rabbi an important lesson. Namely,
Rabbi,
I'll never make that mistake again.
No,
I
wait.
now only go up to men and say, would you like to see my penis bone?
So, Rabbi, don't go away yet. I have something else to say.
Where would I go?
But, no, I'm serious. Do you have a number I can call to get
Go
one?
on Etsy.
Huh?
It's on Etsy. I just found a whole price list.
Okay. Etsy. For
ESTY.
$11.99.
The word
Okay.
is, the key word is penis bone or baculum, B-A-C-U-L-U-M.
I wrote that down.
If you
baculum
just
or
Google
whatever.
that on eBay or anything, you will find lots of them. Hold on, we have
Okay,
a-
the next,
Yes, go ahead.
one more. Okay. I'm really excited about the Fiddler on the Roof because
Okay.
I was in it. I was playing the eccentric villager in Fiddler on the Roof when they presented it in Ojai. So
Uh-huh.
I'm really happy you're going to do that.
Okay,
And
good.
I'm going to be registered.
Okay, good. I'm just going to go across the screen. Stephen Weinstein, if you have your electronic hand up, I don't know if you meant to do that. So while you're fussing with that, I'll call on Murray.
Thanks. In Carlos Suarez's book, The Cypher of Genesis, he introduces us to the Otiat and how central it is to at least the book of Genesis. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
there's a book called The Cypher
No,
of
no,
Genesis
I
by
understood
Carlos
that. I don't know
Suarez.
what you mean by otiat or.
The otiat, the alphabet.
Okay.
So for example, the word Adam, he really explains that it's aleph steeped in dam, which is blood.
Oh, I like it. Yes, that's
Okay.
classic midrash.
So instead of ruach being the spirit, it's that silent aleph that went down Mount Sinai, that unknowable thing, the aleph, steeped in blood.
Mhm.
So that he mentioned something about Hevel, that he had no aleph, so that in a sense, when Cain killed him, he didn't kill an actual person.
Yeah. So
perhaps-
what you're talking about is classic midrash.
Okay, so to continue,
Mhm.
you mentioned Adam is created in Genesis 1:26, and 26 is the sum of the Tetragrammaton. And
Yeah, except the texts are numbered much later.
Well, they are conscious of the text because they make sure never to write Yud Hey for 15. They always use what is it?
Yeah. But we're talking about much later.
But
than
there
the
are
way-
other instances where the 26th verse is important. It's not in every one of them, but
Okay.
I mentioned this to
Okay.
Rabbi Barbara.
Mhm.
But I was interested, you said the other week about Yud Hey Vav Hey, that it was more of a process, a continuation, a sustenance rather than a God.
No. So
You meant.
So here's what I said.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
If it's vocalized Yahweh and you understand it as a verb, it would be the third person plural.
Once removed.
He feel form of the verb to be. He feel is a unique verb form in Hebrew. It doesn't exist in English, and it's a causative form. So if it's vocalized that way, that term can mean the one that will cause being, which I think is a great name for God. But
The
I'm
one
just
that
making
causes being.
Yes.
Because when Moses talks with him, he introduces himself as Ayah Asher Ayah, which is I am.
Ehia is I will be that which I will be. Or it could be I am what I will be. It's just definitely not in the past tense. This is the oddities of Hebrew grammar. There's only two tenses in biblical Hebrew: past tense, which is called perfect, referring to perfected actions, and imperfect, which would refer to either present or future. So ehya can either mean I am or I will be. Asher is a conjunction, so it can mean I am that I am, which gives you this sense of a continuous, enduring, unchanging presence, which I think is a Christian take on this. Or it can be I will be what I will be, which I think is.
And the verse after that, he simplifies it though. He says, "Tell them I am sent you."
Tell them
so,
Ehia sent you.
So I'm just interested in the otiat about Ehya versus Yud Hey Vav Hey, which is the word you should not pronounce.
Yes. So
Yud Hey
Vav
superstitions.
Yud Hey Vav Hey, and they even say you shouldn't even say Yud Hey Vav Hey. You should say Yud Hey Vav K, or you should say Yud Hey and Vav Hey. Yud Hey Vav Hey, my understanding is God's actual name, like Murray or David or Harvey or whatever. Whereas I am is the name that God is revealing to Moses, but it's hardly ever used in the biblical text. Moses says, when these folks ask me, what's your name? What should I tell them? And God says, Ehia Asher Ehia.
I did bring it up to Rabbi Barbara though, because I said, well, when he tells them that in Egypt, how will they know what God's name is? They don't know
But the text
They
doesn't
don't
tell
know
us.
what God's name is.
The text never tells us that he even used that.
It was supposed to be a.
It's an oddity. It's a textual oddity.
It was supposed to be a like a verification code.
Right.
Okay,
right.
but my question was, how did they know the code?
They clearly didn't, because it's never used.
It's never used.
Yeah. So what I would take out of that is one of the ways God describes himself is someone who will continue to be. But anyway,
as creator and sustainer.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Well, I know you didn't say that. I'm just saying a lot of people say that he not only creates the universe, but he sustains it from moment to moment.
That's a mystical thought. Okay. Stephen, and then maybe we'll bring this to a close. Stephen, are you there? You have your name raised and you may not be there. Okay, gang, this is fun. You can buy a penis bone with a crystal. It's 2 bones with a crystal. You can have like
There's a penis
things you
museum in
never
Reykjavik.
knew you needed.
Rabbi, there's a penis museum. There's a penis museum in Reykjavik, Iceland.
Wait,
Oh
it's
my
two-
God, too cold
It's 2
there.
raccoon bones is what it is. It's raccoon penis.
I am going to stop the recording right now.